I'm Dr. David Bernstein, and welcome to our new series, 7 Secrets of Forensic Schema Therapy. Now, almost 20 years ago, I moved to the Netherlands, and during this time, I've been privileged to work with some great forensic institutes here and some terrific people who helped me to develop forensic schema therapy. And over the course of that time, we conducted a major randomized clinical trial which demonstrated good results for forensic schema therapy with some of the toughest forensic patients, the ones with severe personality disorders. And furthermore, we've trained hundreds of therapists in this method. And the purpose of this video is to share a little bit of what we've learned, share some, you could say inside information, the information between the lines about, what to pay attention to and what works with these very challenging patients. So even if you don't work in the forensic field, maybe there's some things here for you as well. So let's go ahead and get started. The first secret of forensic schema therapy is what you see isn't always what you get. Now, what this means is that when we're working in the forensic field, we're always working in conditions of incomplete information. There are many things that we don't know about the patient, things that the patient may be deliberately withholding from us for a variety of different kinds of reasons, or he may present a kind of distorted impression of himself. And that has a really profound, effect on how we work with him. So let's go and take a couple of examples. Now, for those of you who are familiar with schema therapy and with my earlier video series, 25 Tips for Working with Modes, you know that a lot of the action in schema therapy, and particularly through in the forensic field, is working with the sides of the patient, with the emotional states that present in the here and now, and with the challenges that they pose for us. Now, here's a very common mode that you see in the forensic field. This is the angry protector mode, and you can just take a look at it and you'll see that it kind of emanates this nonverbal message, stay away from me, So it's a kind of, patient has a kind of controlled or indirect hostility that sends a very, very clear message. Now, there can be many reasons why, you confront this mode, but in the forensic setting, there are probably two main ones. One is that many of these patients have really horrific histories, experienced abuse, neglect, abandonment, and so forth. And so from deep inside, they feel that they can't trust anyone. And secondly, many people who come for forensic treatment aren't coming voluntarily. They're usually there because they have to, because due to a judge's order or a condition of sentence. And they can be very, very concerned that information that they may be revealing to you may be used against you. They can experience themselves as fighting against a system that doesn't care about them or is abusive toward them. And so for all of these reasons, patients may be very reluctant to share things about themselves. And I'm thinking of one case years ago of a patient who had this mode and who refused to make eye contact with his therapist for many, many months and, only answered questions, with one or two word answers. And only after she, persistently worked in our model over time in a consistent way, did he finally lower his guard, and only after a few years revealed that he had been sexually abused by his mother. And so, again, there may be things that patients don't share because they're afraid of, going to those, painful or shameful places, and also because of concerns about how information may be used against them. So these are, you could say, instances where patients don't create a misleading impression deliberately, but they do omit information. They leave out information. Now here's another example. This is another mode. This is the conning manipulator mode. This is a mode where patients may deliberately create a misleading impression. They may, try to, create a false impression about themselves, that they're quite cooperative and willing. They may be interested in conning and manipulating you and maybe getting you to do some things that they want, write a good report for them, or even help them sometimes engage in some, illegal activities. And, this is a mode that, does present in non-forensic settings sometimes, but obviously generally in a less severe form. But in forensic settings, it comes up quite often, particularly for more psychopathic patients. And in that case, we are really confronted with two problems. Number one is that sometimes we don't know this mode is there. Sometimes we can be taken in by this mode. And we can even find ourselves inadvertently doing things, that the patient wants us to do, without quite realizing it, giving the patients favors or privileges or, whatever. So that can really cause a problem for us. And secondly, this is a mode that is very, very connected to some patients' crimes, right? Some patients have more, the nature of their crimes is more overt, like, for example, patients whose crimes are primarily aggressive. But in many patients, their crimes also involve, conning, manipulating, lying, and so forth. And so this is a mode that is directly connected to, the nature of their offenses. So it's important for us to be able to deal with this mode when it comes up, but it can also mislead us and lead us, down the wrong paths if we're not careful with it. Okay, so these kinds of modes, modes that deliberately omit information, like an, angry protector mode that doesn't want to share information with us, or a conning, manipulative mode that can create a misleading impression, present real challenges for us. And one of the dilemmas that they pose, fundamentally, is whether to trust or not. Here you have patients for whom themselves, trust and mistrust is a major issue, and they can pose these same kinds of issues for us. Shall we trust the patient or not? Now, here's where I come out on this issue. I personally think that if we don't give the patient a degree of our trust, therapy isn't going to go anywhere, that we're just going to stay at a wary distance from our patients. So, especially in schema therapy, where the idea is to, provide, a kind of experience in the therapy relationship, where the patient is able to get their needs met to at least a partial degree, what we call limited reparenting. If that relationship is not to some degree founded on trust, at least on our part, then it's hard to imagine that that relationship is going to go anywhere. At the same time, we don't want to be naively trusting, right? So what I sometimes see in the forensic field is that, these kinds of patients and their modes can produce two polar reactions. One is the kind of therapist who puts himself or herself, in the position of being a cop and trying to catch patients in their lies and, trying to have that kind of, ha-ha reveal moment, I caught you. And of course, that's no basis for developing any kind of therapeutic relationship. Or the opposite, a patient who kind of, naively goes along with, whatever the patient wants and, which can often lead to severe problems. So we have to feel comfortable, dealing with a gray area. And that gray area is one where we give the patient our trust, but if there are things that are happening that lead us to, feel mistrustful, then these are things that need to be looked at. They need to be put on the table. These are things then where, the way we conceptualize it is that, what are the modes that are involved in the patient's doing things, that may undermine our trust. And then we need to be able to confront the patient with those modes, in an empathic way, but nevertheless in a clear and direct way, and really try to understand what the reasons for this are. Okay, so it's not one or the other, either completely trust or completely mistrust. It's kind of, on the one hand, to give your patient a degree of trust, but also have your eyes open and to realize that instances where the patient may not be dealing with you in a trustworthy way are things that need to be explored with the patient. Now, here are a couple of things to pay attention to with regard to these issues. The first is pay attention to what's happening in the room. What's happening between you and the patient interpersonally. Do you notice that, for example, that you're feeling mistrustful of the patient? Or do you notice that, you are, feeling like you're the only one, whom the patient can trust, and that feels very, very special, and you kind of have a special bond with the patient that nobody else shares. Just try to notice what's happening interpersonally. And the way we look at that is that, the patient brings the different sides of himself into the room, his different modes, and then we have our own reactions to it, our modes. And if you're willing to pay attention to that, that can often provide clues. Now, some patients have a very, very well-developed conning manipulator mode. And, sometimes we miss things. Even experienced therapists can sometimes miss when they're being conned. And, that poses a problem because, we're the only person in the room with the patient. So what can you do there? Well, there are a couple things. One is you need regular supervision, whether that's peer supervision or, supervision by, an expert supervisor to help you to get some perspective on what's happening. Another possibility in addition to that is actually to videotape some of your sessions and bring them into supervision or peer supervision so you have other pairs of eyes that can take a look at what's happening in the room, because doing this kind of work in isolation without that kind of peer feedback and guidance or expert feedback and guidance from a supervisor can be extremely difficult. We can miss things that are happening. And number two, pay attention to what is happening outside of the room. Oftentimes there can be discrepancies between what's happening on the inside of the therapy room and what's happening on the outside. Imagine that, you and the patient seem to have a good bond together. Patient is very cooperative with you. And then at the same time, what you are hearing about from the people who are working on the wards, the nurses or other professional staff on the wards, is that this is a patient who is crossing boundaries, causing problems, and so on and so forth. Or you may get wind of the fact that there may be some suspicion that the patient is engaging in illegal activities while the patient is there, on that unit, in that department. So the patient isn't telling you about any of that, but, you get some wind that that's going on. Other things that can be happening outside of the room is that, let's say the patient is involved in some kind of ongoing court case. Very often when there are, ongoing legal issues, patients are very reluctant to open up and share things for fear that, they may be used against him. So look for those, look also to what's happening outside of the room and look for those discrepancies between, how the patient is with you and what's happening outside of the room as well. And finally, how do you handle this situation of, incomplete or sometimes inaccurate information? You need to trust in the process. So, not only is it not a black and white, issue, trust or mistrust or don't trust, but you need to trust in the process. You need to trust that if you work in a consistent way within the forensic schema therapy framework, focusing on modes, also, getting in touch with your own reaction and using the techniques that we've developed in a consistent way over time, that, more and more of, who the patient is and what the patient is about is going to come out. You'll learn more about, what's behind that wall of mistrust. You'll be able to confront the patient at those times when he's being manipulative. You may not always find out everything that the patient has done. There may be things that, he's done in the past that you may never find out about, and, that's the nature of the business. But at the same time, if you trust in the process and you work in this consistent framework, what we've seen is that over time, many of these patients can change, and, you can, get some good results, over time. Okay. Now, if you're interested in learning more about our courses and about the supervision in forensic schema therapy, then you can write me. Feel free to write me at info@safepath solutions.com. And I can also give you information about our courses, not only in forensic schema therapy, but also in SafePath, the team-based form of schema therapy that I've developed. And to find out more about our iModes cards, the images that you saw in this video, you can go to our iModes website, www.imodes.com. Have a great week and see you next time.